So I'm Julia Friedgood. I'm with American Farmland Trust, and I will be moderating today. And planning practice is really a process to use data analysis and other tools to engage communities in building strong community systems. And we look at land use issues, we look at economic development, environmental protection, housing, and so on. But because planning practice is concerned with planning for whole communities and livable communities and all their interconnections, it until recently really hasn't included food, and especially food and agriculture, into mainstream planning activities. And where it did occur, those efforts typically were led by food system stakeholders and people working in fields related to sustainable ag and community food security, but outside of traditional planning practice. What I think has been really interesting in the last few years is that there's this emerging field that's specifically being designed to support, facilitate, and promote local regional agriculture, sustainable agriculture, the whole value chain or supply chains and infrastructure to move food from farm to table, food security, nutrition, and health, and then all the way through the cycle from soil to reuse, recovery, recycling, and disposal systems for food waste and packaging. The food system is really complex, and I use this schematic. I did not create this schematic. It was actually created by Erica Campbell, who will be leading a session later today, and an intern, Heather Davis. And I put it up here mostly just to make the point that it is a complex system, and the speakers that we have today are going to be addressing all of this complexity and the process they use to arrive at something that actually is integrated and makes sense and will help ensure a sustainable food system going forward. So the first speaker we have today is Allison Hastings, and she's from Philadelphia, and her plan with the Delaware River Valley Planning Commission takes a look at 2 states and multiple counties. And so now I'm going to turn it over. Well, first, before I turn it over, sorry, let me introduce all the speakers. So Allison is going to go first, and then we're going to have Brian Williams from Central Ohio, and he's from the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, and he has a strategy for local food. And then the third and final presentation will be Erica Campbell, and she's from Vermont Farm to Plate, and they have recently completed a 10-year strategic plan for their food system. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Allison Hastings.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Allison. I think my screen is up now. So thanks for having me. I'm going to briefly present on who the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, DVRPC, is, why we're interested in the food system, and then give you some highlights from DVRPC's food system planning projects, and talk briefly on implementation. So as a planner, we often do a lot of plans, but we don't often implement. So hopefully I'll touch upon some of the things that our commission is doing to implement our plan. So first, an overview of the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. We're Philadelphia's metropolitan planning organization. We prioritize transportation funding, and we work between 2 states, New Jersey and Pennsylvania, 9 counties, 353 municipalities, and about 5.5 million people. And New Jersey and Pennsylvania are both home rule states, meaning that all the individual municipalities have their own control of land use. They make their own decisions about land use, and a lot of municipalities have to deliver a lot of services to their residents. And so some of our communities are 900 people, and some of our communities, like Philadelphia City, is 1.5 million people. And we were founded in the 1960s around these issue areas: transportation, land use, the economy, and the environment. So that gives us a pretty broad brush, or a pretty broad area on which to plan or advocate, or suggest municipalities adopt various policies. So, and this is a map of DVRPC. We're that yellow section where we are along like the Mid-Atlantic, New York City, Washington, D.C. area, and some of our peer organizations or organizations that do similar work to us. So New Jersey specifically is served by 3 metropolitan planning organizations, DVRPC, again in that yellow, is just one of those organizations. So why is a transportation planning agency interested in the food system planning? We get this a lot. So food cuts across all 4 of our issue areas, again, transportation, land use, the economy, and the environment, and I'll touch briefly on each of those. And I think something that's interesting to note is that we are governed by a board, an 18-member board who is made up of elected officials from the 9 counties and cities that we represent. And they saw this as an important issue in 2007. We were thinking about the future of Greater Philadelphia, thinking about how Greater Philadelphia will look in 2035, 2040, how the transportation system will work. And we were thinking really like post-fossil fuels, what the economy and the transportation system will look like. And so we also start to think about food. If we're thinking about land use, transportation, environment, we also start to need to think about the future of food. What will food look like, or how does Greater Philadelphia get its food in the future? So when it comes to transportation, Greater Philadelphia has a very good network of highways and rail and port facilities, and because of that good network and a multimodal network that moves a lot of people as well as freight, Greater Philadelphia, specifically the ports of Philadelphia, have become the biggest inland port for bananas. So we have lots of strong trade relationships with South American countries, South American companies. And in 2002, 14 million tons of food moved through Greater Philadelphia. When it comes to land use, we have seen a lot, this area has seen a lot of development in the 1990s and 2000s. So we're really thinking about how we're efficiently using land, and agriculture does take up a large amount of land. And so we're really thinking again about the future of food. We're thinking if there's no farms, there's no food. So we're taking that AFT, American Farmland Trust motto or campaign very seriously. When it comes to the economy, Greater Philadelphia, like a lot of other metro areas in the United States, is seeing a no growth or slow growth economy. And so this chart that I have up in front of you is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index, and it shows the volatility of consumer prices. So housing, Medicare, that type of stuff. The blue line shows the volatility of all consumer items and how it changes from month to month, increases or decreases. The red line shows consumer prices, consumer items minus food and energy. And you can see that that's a relatively stable or flat line. So food and energy are very tied together, and they're tied to fossil fuels. So as we enter a post-fossil fuel time period, energy is going to get more expensive, and we're seeing it, and food is going to get more expensive, and we're seeing it now. So we're thinking that if we develop a regional food system, one that connects farmers to consumers, supports smaller businesses, that act as the middleman, that we'll be able to kind of weather these ups and downs in the national economy a little bit better. So here's 2 examples of some of our local food institutions in Philadelphia, a farmer's market and a cooperative. When it comes to the environment, DVRPC has been very involved in environmental issues since we were first founded in the 1960s. In the 1920s, about 20 years ago in the 1990s, we got more involved in land preservation and land conservation as a way to think about preserving our rural areas or agricultural areas in a way to make our transportation dollars go farther in our urban core or suburban areas. So reinvest in the infrastructure we already have and support our rural economies and advocate for land preservation. So this map shows a 100-mile food shed, a hypothetical 100-mile food shed that I'll talk about a little bit more in a little bit. And the red shows the important agricultural soils that we've lost just since the 2000s. So this isn't a map showing all urban development and post-World War II. This is a map really just showing the loss of agricultural soils between a 15 and a 10-year period. So we've lost a tremendous amount of land in a short amount of time. So highlights from DVRPC's food system planning projects, we published 2 big reports. The food system study came out in 2010, and which was an objective study that I'll show some example analysis from. And the food system plan was a follow-up to that, published in 2011, and that took what we learned in the objective study and came up with recommendations. So highlights. The 2010 food system study, we got together a group of content experts, people who are not necessarily planners, but experts in their own fields or within the food system, and we actually asked them to create a scope of work for us. How could a planning commission help them? How could we bring our planning expertise to the food system? Because we were not experts, and I'm still not an expert in the food system. So non-planners, who we're calling our stakeholders, created our scope of work for the food system study. And that was when we decided that we really needed to break up and do an objective study followed up with a prescriptive plan, or a plan that gives recommendations. So we did intensive surveying, which also fed into the plan, because we asked a lot of people about what they thought should change or recommendations for the food system. And then by 2011 or 2010, when we were writing the food system plan, and then published the food system plan in 2011, we had a very large group of very different stakeholders come together. And we decided that it'd be good for everyone to identify values, goals, and then indicators, ways that we can measure everyone's individual actions to see change over time. So here is a slide of some of the different stakeholders that were involved in our food system planning process. Nonprofits who were very engaged in food system issues, as well as foundations to support food system activities, universities, as well as government agencies. So we really try to bring together as many different groups as possible to talk about the food system in general, and not just the local food system, but the food system that feeds Greater Philadelphia, the national or global food system. So what is a food system? And this is how we explain it a lot to a lot of non-food system stakeholders, or people who don't necessarily know that they're a stakeholder of the food system. Everyone's a stakeholder of the food system if you eat. So it's a supply and demand equation with distribution in between. And distribution over the past 40, 100, 200, 400 years has changed dramatically, and it's gotten much more efficient, and that's had changes in our supply and demand. So what does Greater Philadelphia's regional food system look like? So here is a map with a 100-mile food shed, again, a hypothetical 100-mile radius of what could Greater Philadelphia possibly, what are the agricultural resources that are close to Greater Philadelphia. And we have pockets of supply here and there throughout the state of New Jersey, throughout Pennsylvania, but we have a really great supply coming from Lancaster County, which is in Pennsylvania, and it's right outside of DVRPC's service area. So it is not one of the 9 counties that we work directly with, but they are our immediate neighbor. And they're in the top 50 counties, probably top 10 counties of the United States for producing different agricultural products. So we're really lucky that we have such a great agricultural supply so close by. Chester County has a supply of $553 million worth of agricultural products coming out of it. Delaware, which is close to Greater Philadelphia, also produces a lot of agricultural products. So, and the distribution network is I-95, or the New Jersey Turnpike, that connects all the metro areas up and down the East Coast. From, the other major metro areas near Greater Philadelphia are D.C., Baltimore, New York, and then all the way up to Boston. When it comes to supply, when it comes to demand, Greater Philadelphia needs at least $15 billion worth of food each year. So at least that amount. So the demand from Greater Philadelphia far outweighs the supply that we could get close by. Then when you add on top of that Baltimore, Washington's demand, $22 billion worth of food they need every single year. And then New York City's demand far outweighs New York City, the metro area, far outweighs both Baltimore, Washington, and greater Philadelphia metro area's demand. So there's a lot of demand. There's a lot of people living near greater Philadelphia in this 100-mile food shed in the mega region along the northeast. So this is a great opportunity to farm for farmers, which I'll talk about, but it also means that food is a commodity that is traded and it goes to the highest bidder or who can pay the most. So here's an example of some analysis that we did looking at the USDA Census of Agriculture 2007. And we wanted to see within the 100-mile food shed of greater Philadelphia, what were counties specializing in when it comes to agriculture. So this looks at the top commodities per county, and you can see the yellow, some yellow on the outskirts of the 100-mile radius is poultry and eggs, so some counties specialize in poultry and eggs. That pink light purple is nursery and greenhouse products. So you can see a lot of how many counties specialize in nursery and greenhouse products, and that includes not only landscaping materials, but also mushrooms are grown in warehouses. Lots of food is grown in greenhouses. And then that dark green, especially Philadelphia County and nearby counties, Gloucester and Salem counties, that's veggie production. And that bright purple in Atlantic County, that's dairy production. So what we started to notice is that there's a lot of non-food items that are grown in the food shed, and they command top value, top dollar. One big finding from the food system study is that the 100-mile food shed does not produce enough food for the 5.5 million people who live in greater Philadelphia, nor does it come even close to feeding the over 30 million people who live within that 100-mile food shed. Again, that 100-mile food shed contains parts of New York, parts of Baltimore, all of Delaware, all of New Jersey. So over 30 million people live there. It's the second densest part of the United States, second only to New York City's 100-mile food shed, and they overlap a lot. This is a very dense part of the United States, but we still have a lot of agricultural resources close by. So getting to the food system plan, we took all of this objective information that we learned, and we asked our stakeholders, which had grown from like 6 people who were interested in what we were doing, to 100, to about 150, and we got them to agree on values and goals. What did we want to get out of the food system? If the conventional food system does not represent our values, what values would represent, what values do we want the regional food system to represent? And we organized all of our recommendations in these 6 values that you see before you, economic development, fairness, ecological stewardship. And we decided that we wanted to come up with 10 indicators that we would measure progress on, like maybe an every 2-year basis, to see how everyone's individual actions, how they could accumulate or aggregate up to some measurable change. So here's an indicator example for economic development, and it shows food sector employment in greater Philadelphia. So you can see between 2001 and 2008, the amount of people employed in food system activities increased. And we think that this is probably underreporting, since a lot of food system activities are part of the informal economy, as well as a lot of food employment, like being a nutritionist or working for different companies around nutrition we can't necessarily tease them out of the data. So we think there's probably at least 300 jobs alone in greater Philadelphia that are associated with the food system. When it comes to food insecurity, we also looked at that as an indicator, and we used USDA's household survey information around food insecurity. And between 2001 and 2008, again, we see this increase, and pretty much a dramatic increase, 38% increase between 2001 and 2008 of households reporting food insecurity as USDA defines it. We also wanted to, one of our goals and lots of our recommendations in the plan has to do with growing the next generation of farmers, encouraging more production in this dense area, this dense metropolitan area. So one of our indicators is that we would like to see more land in production in the future. So here is land in production, again from the USDA Census of Agriculture, and you can see that this is for New Jersey specifically. There's been a loss of agricultural land over the last 10 years, 1997 to 2007. So when the next Census of Agriculture comes out in 2012, we're hoping that we see an increase. We're very optimistic or very positive as planners. So the Food Systems Stakeholder Committee that helped us with our study and then helped us with our plan reviewed and created their own recommendations. We ended up with 52 recommendations spread throughout our value categories. And here's a couple examples of the top priorities. So what came to the top for the Stakeholder Committee. So they would like to see, Greater Philadelphia would like to see different models that keep farmland affordable. We want to see market-based solutions that protect natural resources and reward landowners for best management practices. When it comes to fairness, a lot of our stakeholders see that programs in schools will be a good way to establish long-term eating habits with kids as they grow into adulthood. When it comes to economic development, we want to see more business development strategies that around food and also different kinds of financing tools that are available for food entrepreneurs and new and beginning farmers, because they have different finance needs than from other food companies, or sorry, from other companies in general. The Stakeholder Committee wants to see an increase in public awareness around healthy food. And the Food Systems Stakeholder Committee that helped us create our study and create our plan wants to continue to meet indefinitely. They want the opportunity to meet each other, or to see each other on a regular basis and share news. So what are we doing now? DVRPC is still convening the Stakeholder Committee, and we will do so as long as our committee members want to meet on a regular basis, share information, and partake in shared learning opportunities. And they will also be a way for us to monitor DVRPC's food system planning. They are content experts, so they can review our ideas, our planning ideas, and kind of ground truth them. We've also been really lucky to work with the William Penn Foundation, which is a regional foundation in Greater Philadelphia, all around a financial and technical assistance initiative, which has helped us to implement top recommendations from the food system plan. So a lot of times planners work on plans that don't have implementation dollars with them. So we're really happy that we had an opportunity to have some implementation dollars behind us. We'll continue to monitor the implementation of the food system plan. We're assisting with others' efforts whenever possible. And we're also investigating the roles of local governments, those 353 municipalities that we serve and those 9 counties that we serve. What are their roles in a regional food system? So here's an example of an implementation grant that we made with William Penn Foundation. This is to PASA, the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture, and they are looking at developing lease models or business models that help new farmers or beginning farmers, especially farmers who are not coming from farming families, access privately held land or land that's conserved by a land trust. So we're really excited about this program, and it's really catching on. PASA's done an amazing job spreading the word and getting people excited about farming and making that happen, especially for people who do not have access to land to grow. We also helped fund a advertising or like an advertising campaign. Greater Philadelphia Tourism Marketing Corporation, GPTMC, is Greater Philadelphia's tourism organization. They have millions of dollars that they spend throughout the world, throughout the country, advertising Greater Philadelphia. So they created the Philly Homegrown program, which brings more stories to light about what makes Greater Philadelphia unique when it comes to food, what makes this a food destination. And then, as I said again, we are looking at what is the role of local governments when it comes to the regional food system. So we created a municipal implementation tool brochure. GVRPC does this a lot for our constituents, which are the counties and the municipalities, around hot topics in planning. So this is an example of a hot topic in planning. And we identified a couple different steps that municipalities with their unique powers, their unique purview, what could they do at the local level to create or support regional food systems or community food systems. And this is all of our reports are available online. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Julia. Thank you so much for your attention.
That was great, Allison. Thank you so much. And we have time to take a couple of questions that are really specifically about Allison's presentation. And I also want to mention, because several people did ask whether or not the webinar or the slides would be available after the session, and the answer is yes. They'll probably be posted tomorrow, and the URL will be at the end of the slideshow, or all of the slideshows, but it's www.farmland.org/systems-planning. So for a couple of the more substantive questions for Allison, the first one was, do you see this as a way, this process, as a way to do a farmland protection plan?
Yes, definitely. We got interested in food system issues not only because we were thinking about the economy, Greater Philadelphia's economy post-fossil fuel, but also because we've done a lot of work with farmers, especially around farmland preservation, farmland protection, open space protection. And why we became interested in food systems is because we were seeing more and more farmers, especially in New Jersey, saying that they couldn't find they couldn't get top dollar. They couldn't make enough money competing in the conventional or the global food system. So we wanted to explore that. And so this was a really good way for us to learn a little bit more about farming, especially since we were interacting with so many farmers and advocating for them to preserve their land. And we really didn't know much about farming, the business, and then number two, the future of food. So this really helped us understand not only the challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day basis, but also the necessity and how important I think local food, regional food, our farmers are going to become in the future.
Thank you. And then a second question is sort of a multi-part question for you, Allison. And it starts with a question about whether or not there was a map of the process that you used. And then related to that, how long was your conversation with stakeholders about values, goals, and indicators, and who made the ultimate decisions about these, and especially how did you engage people who are food insecure in the process?
Okay, good questions. I'm writing them down so I make sure I get them. We did not make a map of the process. Going from 2007 to today, you know, it's a 3 to 4 year process, and we're constantly learning. But we knew that we wanted to do things in a systematic way. Like we wanted to do an objective study and see what data sources were out there, test hypotheses. So a lot of the surveying that we did, we had people tell us what they thought was going on in the food system, or what they saw, like what were the changes that they saw over the last 5 to 10 years. And then through data, publicly available data too, we tried to either prove those hypotheses or figure out why people had a certain perception that's not really there. So that was really interesting. So we started with lots and lots of surveying. When it came to deciding the values, the goals, and the indicators, that was a year-long process unto itself. We held big meetings where like 60 to 100 people would attend, and we would present to them everything that we heard from them. And then we did a lot of surveying in person as well as online to get like the best recommendations or see what recommendations like floated to the top. Ultimately, though, we did like DVRPC, the planners had to make the decision. We had, you know, it's our report at the end of the day. We had to get it published at the end of the day. So we decided to make the final decision on a lot of things. But I think the stakeholder group would say that a lot of them feel like their input was taken into consideration. the food system plan that we came up with is nothing like the food system plan DVRPC would have done if it did it alone. So because we reached out to stakeholders, and especially those stakeholders who are not planners and not like our traditional stakeholders or constituents, I think the plan touches a lot of other areas that prior to 2007, I had no idea what a food desert was. I had no idea that there was a conundrum, what's the word I'm looking for? I didn't know there was hunger and obesity occurring at the same time in the same communities. That wasn't on my radar as a planner. And our food system plan tries to really address that, or at least take into account those recommendations about food deserts, food swamps, and nutrition assistance programs, for example. When it comes to how did we engage with those who are food insecure, that's a really tough question and a really good question. We're working at a very large scale. So we serve 5.5 million people in Greater Philadelphia, and then the scope of our work was this 100-mile food shed. So we decided to go to people who work with the food insecure. So like Greater Philadelphia Coalition Against Hunger was a key part of our stakeholder group and gave us a lot of information. The Food Trust, who's led a lot of pioneering work throughout the country, many of their staff members were on our stakeholder committee. And what we tried to do was take what those organizations had already done, not reinvent the wheel, but make sure that our plan was consistent and also included a lot of their key recommendations. So what we wanted to try to do is show a comprehensive plan for creating a more just, sustainable regional food system. So again, we didn't do a lot of on-the-ground surveying, but we did talk to the experts and take the best stuff that was out there and incorporate it into one readable plan.
That's great. There's still quite a few more questions, but I do want to get to the next speaker, who's Brian Williams. So I'm going to keep track of the questions, and we'll come back to them at the end. And then if any questions don't get answered, we'll make sure that answers are posted on the website along with the webinar. So next is Brian Williams from the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission.
Hi, I'm Brian Williams, and actually I'm waiting to get my screen showing up. And we have a blip.
Well, while you're doing that, I'm going to ask one more question, trying to go down. There's so many great questions out there, but one of them that I think is kind of specific in approach to DVRPCs was how did you calculate the per capita farmland need?
We used, so we're not nutritionists. We don't have nutritionists on staff. So that's a great question. We went to the work that Cornell University was doing under, I'm forgetting his name, Peter. Julia, you know him.
Yes, Chris Peters, who's now at Tufts.
Thank you, Chris Peters, who is now at Tufts. We used a lot of his work, and he's also a soil scientist, so we drew on that knowledge base. So we decided to look at like what a middle-of-the-road diet would look like that includes some meat, some protein, some vegetables, and then we calculated it for Greater Philadelphia, knowing that we have slightly different growing season than New York State, which is what we were using the information on. But I think something that planners should do is recognize that we're not experts in everything, and it's okay to use other people's research, especially if it's well vetted and well thought out.
Great. Brian, are you ready to go?
I am, and I apologize for the delay. I'm not sure what happened. I am going to start off with some things. Actually, I can gloss over them because the organization that I'm working for is actually very similar to what Allison outlined. She's 9 counties in 2 states. We are 12 counties in 1 state. And again, it's the same kind of thing. An MPO started with a focus on transportation and has branched out into a number of other things. We also have a large number of municipalities and townships, not as many as the 353. our total population is a little over 2 million, which is about half of what Delaware Valley is dealing with. But the structures are very similar. There's a lot of parallels there, and as to why we got involved in local food, again, there are some similarities. Although actually, I think in large part where we started in Central Ohio was farmland preservation. You know, as a longtime farmland preservation advocate, I frequently found, you know, when I talk to farmers groups, they say, well, you want to preserve farmland, make sure farming is profitable. That's the best way to do it. Local food is a good way to help make farming profitable. So we got into that from the farmland preservation angle, and then very quickly saw how many other different angles, different stakeholders, different interests come to the table. So we started in 2009 for about a year-long, little more than a year-long process to do an assessment and plan. We released it on Earth Day in 2010, and there you have a picture of it, and then there's a URL where you can find it online. What's pictured here is the executive summary with all of our 24 recommendations, but we also have a full plan which is about 3 or 4 times the size and has more detail. It's organized in the same way, but has more of the background information. The approach we took was not so much to there are going to be a lot of other places with much better and much more comprehensive assessments than we did. Our focus was to do an assessment primarily as a tool to do the plan. In order to find out where we're going to go, we need to find out where we are now. So our assessment was really kind of looking at more of a snapshot rather than detailed studies and original resource. We relied a lot on what already had been done. Now, I put together this presentation, in large part to say what can other communities do, other regions do to put together an assessment and plan, rather than showcasing what we did. Although obviously what we did will, I'm going to be explaining a lot of that, but the starting point is what is local food, and there's different ways to define it. I remember a couple of years ago walking into a store with one of my sons and saying, well, I got to check and see what they have in terms of local food. He said, well, what do you mean by local? Is it just in town here, just in the county? What is it? We walked in the door of the store, and there was a big display of local produce, and on the peppers it was grown on such and such a farm in Pickaway County, and the tomatoes were such and such a farm in Madison County. And I thought, well, there's a lot of ways to measure it, but that's probably the best. Let the consumer decide. But from the standpoint of doing a plan, a lot of things you can do. It can be countywide, it can be region, it can be state, it can be watershed. What we have here, the pink through here is the Scioto River watershed, and Columbus is here in the center, and that's one way to do it, and that's fairly contiguous with the black boundaries. These are the 12 counties in Central Ohio that are part of our plan, and so for us, for the purposes of our plan and the counties we operate in, the communities we serve, we focused on food that is produced, processed, distributed, and consumed in our 12-county region. And we did that knowing full well that even that, the words may sound specific, but the reality is a little bit more mushy. For example, we look up here at Knox County, and in that county, it is local by our definition, and some of the things grown there are going to be serving the Columbus area here. But Holmes County, which is the third leading agricultural county in the state, and a large Amish population. It is not in our area, so we don't consider it local, but people in Knox County would consider it local. So there's no simple, clear way to do this. Any boundaries you put on there are going to be fairly arbitrary, and you need to keep that in mind, and the local goes a little further. Why do we want to promote local food? Well, there's a lot of sustainability reasons. As I mentioned earlier, preserving farmland by making farms viable. On the consumer end, healthy eating. It is economic development, and it is making fresh products more widely available, accessible to everybody. As I mentioned earlier, our general approach was not so much on the detailed research and the assessment, but more focused on the process, on bringing all the right stakeholders to the table, getting commitment from people from different interests and from different parts of the region. In terms of geography and in terms of specialties, special interests, and that is through that process to put together a series of recommendations. And the phrase that came up so often was connecting the dots. The more we started looking into what we have now, we would see wonderful organizations, like an organization called Local Matters, which is doing a lot on education programs in some of the Columbus public schools, on cooking, food preparation, and fresh local food. But the same organization also does advocacy work. They had something called the Veggie Van to take it into urban food deserts, and make fresh produce available. They do a whole lot of different things. So you have an organization like that. You have some initiatives among city or county governments. You have some very innovative farmers doing CSAs. You have maybe some distributors or processors that are doing something. So you have all these things that are already going on, and they're really great, but they're not part of a system. To build a system, to really put together a comprehensive plan, you need to bring all those people to the table and connect the dots. Who should be involved? This is going to vary from place to place, but some of the ones I have listed here are going to be fairly common in a lot of these things, and I want to highlight two here. One is economic development professionals, whether it's a Chamber of Commerce or a governmental economic development agency or whatever. But this is about economic development. You want to have some of those people at the table, and public health, municipal or county health department. I think that's very important. What we found a lot in Ohio is with county health departments, from county to county, the interpretation of regulations on at farmers markets, for example, may vary wildly, and a lot of health departments may take a real hard line. We want to have them at the table to see the bigger picture of what we're doing. That this actually is going to be good for public health by making fresh local food more widely available. So you want to bring those people. I'm not going to go through the whole list. You can see that, but those are a couple that I in particular wanted to highlight. Now, when you bring all these interests together, you got to work a little bit on a structure. You want to have that diversity of interests. You don't want to have too big of a group because that gets unwieldy, but you don't want it to be too small because you want to have all those different interests. And it seems that under 20, 15, give or take 3, seems to be a good workable number. Obviously, you want to have more people involved in the whole process. So when you put together your steering committee, you're going to want to have task forces aimed at particular issues and interests. And in doing that, yeah, you may have a couple people from the steering committee on the task force, but you want to bring in, another 5, 6, 8 more who are not part of the steering committee who have more expertise, and you try and cast a wider net that way. And then, so once you get a structure put together, how do you go about assessing? And we tried to avoid the whole idea of paralysis by analysis. Obviously, you need a lot of good information, but if you get so tied up in gathering and analyzing information, you sort of lose sight of the big picture. So we tried to use what was already available, covering our whole region or parts of our region, and based on that, try and get a snapshot of the current conditions. And these things that I listed below under the current conditions, these are things that we put together. Our task forces were organized around production, processing, distribution, consumption, and resources. Now, I have barriers in there, but basically each of the task forces would do some assessment of each of those areas, and then at the end of that assessment, they would identify what are the barriers to growth in each of these areas, and those barriers are what led to the plan, to the whole idea of how you get from farm to market. We identified all those barriers. We reconvened those task forces around those different interests, and reconvened them, but also tried to broaden them and bring some other people to the table, and kind of analyze strategies that are used elsewhere, and to just a lot of brainstorming, talking to other people, talking to other experts, and identify possible ways to break down or overcome those barriers. And that led to a list of items which consistently got winnowed down to the 24 recommendations that we ultimately made. But one of the key things that came out of this, I think, is a lot of us would get very frustrated. We talk to people about local food, and everybody says farmers markets and community gardens. Great, wonderful. Those are good. They're very visible. They are the public face of local food right now. But in large part, these are things that account for part of your plate, part of the year. It's a kind of a drop in the bucket, and I don't say that to diminish these things, because this is the entry point for people who are really interested in local food and the whole system. So I don't care how big of a county or region you're looking at in your plan. The question is, how are we going to feed ourselves on local food year round, and look at sustainable development. That's the question. The answer is going to include processing and distribution, the local food infrastructure. And what we have here in this picture is a family-run dairy processing plant. A father and several of his sons who all had farms in the same area, and they got tired of the treadmill they were on, and they decided, well, they want to process their own milk, so they have their own line of milk that is pasteurized but not homogenized, sold in glass bottles, and they've got kind of a niche market and their own ice cream, and it's a nice little operation, but they did it by creating jobs with their own processing and distribution. And of course, supply and demand is always one of the big questions. It's it's a real challenge to balance the you want to make sure you have a strong demand. To get that supply. Well, if the demand grows way faster than the supply, you're going to have a problem. You're going to have a real big problem if the supply grows faster than the demand. You got to tie all of these things together. And the line I use is that in Ohio, if every farmer in the state next year decided to grow for local markets, and every consumer in Ohio decided to buy local, we would not be able to make it happen because we do not have the processing capacity, and we do not have the distribution system is not set up for local channels. So you really need to work carefully to balance that supply and demand, and you do that, I think, by starting in the middle with processing and distribution and some form of food hubs, food aggregation hubs, and/or distribution hubs. And actually, I'm going to touch a little bit on hubs when I talk about the implementation here. There's a lot of different things that that we did was reach out to local governments to encourage local resolutions in support of local food. Yes, that's largely symbolic, but it kind of gets something on the public agenda. So that's a start. Collaborate with other local food efforts, either within or beyond the region, to share ideas, bring people into the fold, work on things together. You're probably going to want to look at state policies. You definitely want to work with business groups, chambers of commerce, and get people recognizing that this is business. And one other thing, when I mentioned food hubs a second ago, I'm working with a group of people in Ohio that originally they were interested in doing some local food retailing. And what I told them, and what they apparently heard from all the other stakeholders they approached, is that okay, that's a fine idea, but at some point you're going to hit a plateau unless you really deal with the infrastructure, the processing and distribution. And what we're working on now is trying to get some funding for the beginnings of a network of food aggregation hubs in some of the rural areas, tying into distribution hubs in some of the urban areas. And it's called the Ohio Food Hub Network. Earlier on people were talking about, hub and spokes. And I said, well, it's not really spokes. It's not a neat model. It's more of a network. The lines are not neatly drawn. You may have one aggregation area that's feeding into two urban distribution areas. There's going to be a lot of overlap. So we're working on a pilot project that would serve Columbus and draw from southeastern Ohio, but hope to put that together in a way that ultimately will serve the whole state. We're very interested in that project because if that comes to fruition, that is going to address, at least partially address, probably half of our 24 recommendations, maybe even more. Real good model. The other thing that we're doing with implementation is, the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission is doing the plan. We don't really have authority to fully implement a plan. We put it out there. We can encourage implementation in different places. What we are doing is in each of our 12 counties, we are trying to have local food councils serving those, and that it may mean 2 or 3 counties will want to go together on their council. Maybe they'll all be countywide. We have about 6 up and running now in some fashion. Up and running meaning they've had at least one kind of organizational meeting, and others have, and we have one that's been around for 8 or 10 years. So it's a whole range of things. But we want those councils to advocate for all of the recommendations and kind of prioritize those things in their areas. They are going to be the primary voice for advocates for implementation of this plan. But there's also a lot of overlap county to county, so we would like a couple of representatives from each of those local councils to come together and convene a regional council with you know, that would represent all the local councils. They would be able to share ideas on a lot of things, and other times they might come together as one voice to advocate for something region-wide, or speaking as a region, maybe have some effect on some state policy. But you know, the key thing is to bring all of these people together. We're just in the process of that now, kind of laying the groundwork for some kind of a regional council. And that brings us close to wrapping it up. But I just wanted to summarize by saying, you know, what we have with local food now is this wonderful, successful niche. How do we turn it into a mainstream success and get it into the, you know, not just the farmers markets and public markets and things like that, but get it into the grocery stores, make it widely available to everyone, and that's what we're striving for. And I'll take some questions if anybody has any.
Actually, Brian, thank you so much, but I'm noticing that it's 3 o'clock and we haven't gotten to Erica yet, so I think we're going to go straight to Erica and then save the questions till the end, if that's okay.
Fine.
And if Erica on this end can get the next one up quickly.
So can everyone see the Farm to Plate screen?
I can.
Great. Well, my name is Erica Campbell. I work at the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund in Vermont, and I'm the program director for the Farm to Plate initiative. And so today I'm just going to share with you a little about the process that Vermont went through to develop this 10-year strategic plan, as well as share with you some key lessons learned. I'm not going to really get into too much about Vermont, but I think you all know it's a small rural state. We have 14 counties and less than 700,000 people. So some of you more urban folks, it really is more of a rural area, as many of you probably know already. So Farm to Plate came about, there were several groups around Vermont really talking about this, and just seemed like the time was right to put this forward. It was actually the Vermont legislature and the governor that tasked Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund with this, and Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund we're not a planning organization. We are research and development of the green economy. We also do technical assistance, but we do have some planners on staff, which is great. But we were sort of looked upon as a neutral group that isn't really an advocacy group per se, but that has sort of these broad skill sets and that people sort of respected and thought could move this plan forward. But as with Delaware Valley, it's not necessarily content experts. And that's why we engaged broad stakeholders. So the three goals were really just to focus on the economic development and jobs in the farm and food economy, really for trying to support the businesses and the farms here, as well as improve access. So that was kind of the three goals we started out with. But of course, we developed a lot more goals along the way. So our strategic planning process it was very data-driven, but it had a lot of stakeholder input, and over 1,200 people, which is a good chunk of Vermont's population, 24 focus groups, 8 regional food summits, over 200 in-depth interviews. So it was a lot of input and a very diverse range of stakeholders as well. A very, the whole thing focused on the soil-to-soil approach, which we'll talk about more. Included all types of agriculture production. We're predominantly dairy in Vermont, but it looked at all components of production, and as well as all scales of agriculture. So we don't have the huge farms here, but some people think some farms are big, and they're not really big compared to national. But we did try to look across that as well as all markets, but again with a local, regional focus. So what's in our plan? We have a lot of data. Our plan is actually getting close to 1,000 pages as we're sort of wrapping up any final chapters, and it's a lot of data. So we actually have a nice digestible 50-page executive summary that sort of what's in circulation. It's the only thing in print, actually. Current conditions and analysis, so really looking at what we have and what are some of the gaps. We did SWOT analysis for many components of the food system, and through all of our stakeholder input came up with an analysis of each section, which led to a lot of the development of the strategies. We also worked with a lot of people to develop goals and a variety of goals for the food system, and we also did an economic impact analysis. So this is sort of our food system diagram, and this is a soil-to-soil approach that many of you are familiar with. Starting at the top with farm inputs, that's anything from soil and land to water, energy, and labor. Production, and again, all types of production, processing, value added, that could be meat processing, slaughterhouses, wholesale distribution and retail distribution, as well as consumer demand, which really drives this, the production side and drives this value chain all the way through to the nutrient management, which helps close the loop. And of course, there's some components of nutrient management that are turning not only food scraps and other farm waste that, into good soil, but also into energy for those farming inputs. And all those little other numbers you see are sort of the jobs. And again, this is probably a drop of the bucket to some urban people, but there's a lot of jobs in the food system here for Vermont, and we really looked across the entire spectrum and got data. And so there's a lot of cross-cutting issues to this food system, including food security, and we have chapters for all that. And the support system around the outside is just all those things, technical service providers and policymakers and that really support this sort of internal food system businesses. I'm not going to go through this data source list, but we have a long list of data sources. I don't even think this is complete, but it's really some of the highlights. Of course, we use census, but there was just a lot of other data that we used that was available, and some we're still working on as far as consumption data, figuring out how we're going to track local food consumption and sales is quite a challenge. We also did surveys, so that was another form of data source that we got. And I'm also not going to read this diverse engagement list, but like Brian's list, there was just a huge amount of stakeholders that we engaged and community members, and it was a really capacity building experience. So we actually broke out our chapters similar to the food system, and we have we actually started it off though with consumer demand. It's sort of a little out of order actually with what was on. Oh, and that's supposed to be 3.2, 3.1, 3.2. Consumer demand, farm inputs, food processing, so the entire food system chain. So we have sort of a chapter on each one, and then we also have cross-cutting issues that really cut across all of those themes. So obviously food security, even though that, I think this plan was the original impetus is really to do economic development. You can't do a comprehensive plan like this without really looking at food security, and we have a great appendix in our appendices. We have it's called Dissolving the Double Bind, and it really looks deeply at the challenge between having farms and food system business be viable and have make a living and pay a livable wage and all that, and then also have it be affordable, and some of the food access issues. Again, there's just a lot of really important cross-cutting issues, and that Section 4.5 financing the food system, we have a sort of a general continuum along the financing chain, because all the way from traditional bank loans up to equity investors, and laying out some of this, food system businesses actually come to this plan and are writing business plans on this and are using it as a source of assistance as they navigate their way through this. So I'm not going to go all the way into our goals because we have 33 goals, but we do have indicators with each goal, and each of these indicators has multiple measures with data sources attached. So as much as we can, we try to get measures that were available, although we're developing some of these, especially with consumption. We don't have, we have quite a bit of proxies that we use to gauge local food consumption, and we'd really like to get even a better measure of that. So we're actually working with University of Vermont to develop a methodology around that. But each of these sample goals that I'm putting up here has a variety of measures, and again, these were all developed with a high level of stakeholder input, and as well as even some of the measures we chose. Some we chose because they were available, but others because there was a real need for people to measure these things to gauge success in all different kinds of work across the food system. So that's another goal 7. So we also do have environmental goals in there, even though I just wanted to mention that, even though those top 3 goals initially put forward by the legislature did not have sustainability and environment in there, they're in several of our goals. So I just wanted to definitely mention that. Just 2 examples of the 60 highest priority strategies, and we actually have dozens more strategies. And so, providing technical assistance in business planning services, we just realized Vermont has a great TA service provider community, and they're actually quite networked, which is fantastic. But we just heard over and over from businesses and farms, and that the better they can be, the more viable, the better a price they're going to be able to provide consumers, the more markets they're going to be able to reach, and the better they're going to be able to pay their employees, and multiple other reasons for technical assistance. And another strategy is expand the farm and agronomic practices, so nutrient management programs. I'm not going to go into these numbers with the economic impact potential, but we did a bunch of calculations, and we really put forth that we could create 1,500 new jobs with this if we had a 5% increase in production. So if anyone is interested in really learning about this, they're welcome to call myself or one of my colleagues who actually did a lot of these calculations, and we'd be happy to share with you how we did that. So this is really an exciting part right now, that we have this very big strategic plan out there that a lot of people are really excited about. And we realize that no one organization alone can implement this plan. Ultimately, we really need an entire network, and I heard that in the other presentations today, that this implementation is very big. It's a very complex food system. So we've developed and are helping to coordinate the Farm to Plate network. And what that is it's many organizations working together to implement the strategic plan toward the goals developed in that plan. And really what we want is to enable this coordination towards the goals, as I mentioned, as well as to really enhance those organizations that are part of the network to meet their goals. So we see these goals as compatible, and that really, by joining this network, they're also, there's benefits to being part of the network. And so in this network, we have nonprofit organizations, farm, food systems businesses, a lot of different government agencies. I also didn't put on here, I meant to put on here, we have funders as part of this network, and I'll go into that a little bit more because I think that's really an important feature that will help make this network successful and sustainable over time. So the network structure basically is farmland access, and well, actually, take one step back. We have working groups, and we have a steering committee. And right now, we're launching. We've launched the network, and we've had our first round, and now we're on our second round of working group meetings. The Farmland Access Working Group, for example, has anyone from people like Julia's organization trying to get folks onto farmland and farmland tenure to local land use planners and regional planners. These working groups are developed around high leverage areas, and they're really at that 15,000-foot level to sort of track and monitor how we're doing. They also encourage collaboration, cross-silo thinking, but really track and figure out how we're doing, and then sort of reassess and as we're evaluating, maybe tweaking strategies or putting resources into different areas than maybe we thought were originally important. We also have local and regional marketing and consumer education. Education and workforce development actually just came from that meeting, and that group is working on fantastic things to really create a continuum, a PK through adult education continuum all across the food chain, not just in farming. Technical assistance, it's just a huge leverage area for multiple goals for the food system. Aggregation distribution, we have food hubs emerging, and this is just a huge piece, as Brian said, to link the supply and demand. And we actually have dairy as its own group because they have a lot of growth and diversification, and they just kind of got their own group. So we also have cross-cutting teams. We actually, since I didn't update this model, we've actually added a policy team because we've realized we need that. But these are just teams that are really going to sort of help us monitor certain really important cross-cutting areas. And task forces are sort of being developed. They're going to come and go, but those are sort of focused on highest priority strategies. We already have a meat processing that came out of the Farm to Plate planning. They've already put out grants for meat cutters, and it was just identified as an early bottleneck, and it got momentum. So we're also building a structure to support this network. This is really, we think it's really important. And so part of that's going to be a food system atlas that houses a lot of data, provides a place where organizations can track data, and how we can really assess how we're doing, as well as just a platform for communications. So I'll just go over real quick the key lessons learned in this, and one is that convincing folks that food systems development is economic development, and getting that buy-in is just huge. Diverse participation. Really, it's just really important to get a lot of different voices in there, and have people to be actually part of that planning process from a wide variety of areas, as well as this whole top-down, bottom-up. There's Vermont's very local rule as well, and it's people sort of like decentralized, community-based local control. Yet there's also just a lot of people saying that we do not have great coordination, and that if we were coordinated, we could really maximize a lot of potential and not be duplicative and all that. So, really, and then the other thing about the top down is actually getting those key leaders to really buy into the plan as well. It's been a hugely important piece to the success of the Vermont plan. So another lesson learned is social networking, that part of bringing stakeholders together is suddenly now they're forming new relationships and building trust and capacity building. Data and performance measures, where, like I mentioned before, we have a lot of the data we had. There's a lot of data still, data that we still like to collect, and metrics that we'd still like to develop, such as the consumption measures. But really that it's very important to connect those measures back to the goals and really try to measure success. In digging deeper too with a real, we realized, that I could give a lot of examples of that, but really just people thought that this was a problem, but maybe it actually wasn't the problem when you dig deeper. Like, for example, there was a lot of perception that we needed a lot more slaughterhouses, but really it came down to we needed better meat, better trained meat cutters and a little bit more processing capacity. So just one of the many examples how you do have to really dig deep and ask a lot of questions to really get at important issues and solutions. And finally, process and design. Can't say how important that is to this. As important as the plan and the data itself. Well-designed process. Excuse the typo there. Was a last-minute addition, this one. Creates ownership and ensures implementation. So it's really important to have a very well-designed process. Really thinking about implementation all the way through. The other thing, as I mentioned, having funders at the table in the design and process as well as at our implementation network is very important. And then finally, just as I mentioned, the governance network for implementation, as I mentioned before. So I think that's it. So thank you.
Thank you, Erica, and thank everybody for participating in the call and staying on the phone. I realize that we have run over a little bit in terms of time, but we still do have a few more minutes where the webinar software will still work, and I did want to take some questions, especially ones that I think have implications for all the plans. And since, Erica, you ended talking a little bit about funding, I wanted to start with that one because it came up in both your presentation and in Allison's, which is how was your process funded and staffed? So maybe, Erica, you could start.
Yeah, sure. So we actually got initial money from the Vermont legislature, and I can't remember how much it was, but maybe $100,000. It wasn't enough, that's for sure. Unfortunately, we needed more than that, and so we did also tap into a variety of private foundations.
Allison, would you like to answer that?
So the question was about funding. DVRPC, we have a relatively somewhat flexible planning budget, and we decide on what projects to work on each year. So we were also given a $100,000 budget a year for our food system planning project through DVRPC's funds. And it wasn't nearly enough that we could have used double that. And then we also partnered with the William Penn Foundation to create an implementation fund, which was separate from DVRPC's planning dollars that funded our analysis. The fund that we have from William Penn Foundation is really to implement recommendations and then help a lot of the organizations already active in the food system professionalize, scale up, or try new ideas.
And Brian, how about you?
Well, we were kind of low budget in the initial part. We had a grant, a $20,000 grant from the Columbus Foundation to work on this, and that was supplemented with a lot of my general work is funded through the Gund Foundation in Cleveland, and that helped it quite a bit the first year. The second year, leading into when the report was released, again, I still had the gun funding, and we had another slightly larger grant from the showing an interest in this. Very often they're particularly interested in maybe the public health aspects and food access angle. But if if you present it as how this can help address multiple issues, I think a lot of foundations are interested in this.
Great, thank you. And then another question that was asked around several of the presentations was sort of in that broad list of stakeholders, and all of you had a wide stakeholder process, consumers didn't seem to be listed specifically. So did you engage consumers, and if so, how? How about Allison, you start?
I think a lot of consumers were engaged. Some consumers joined our stakeholder committee, just because they were interested. But I would again say, like, any person who eats is a stakeholder, and so a lot of our content experts were consumers. So, a lot of people, especially a lot of anti-hunger advocates, are really thinking about the bottom dollar for the clients that they serve. So we also engaged a lot of direct service organizations that work one-on-one with people, with a lot of different people, especially people who are trying to make their food dollar go far. And then we interacted with a lot of organizations that run Buy Fresh, Buy Local programs. So there were some consumers, but there's not a whole lot of organized consumer groups at the regional or local level to begin with.
I agree with Allison. I think a lot of the anti-hunger advocates, represent that a lot. But that's where I know there were a lot of surveys tend to be involved in these things. Now, at MORPC we did not do a new survey or our own survey, but we relied on information from every couple of years Ohio State University does a consumer attitudes survey, and increasingly there are a lot of questions relating to local food consumption and buying habits and interest in local food, and even in public policies that support local food, and the numbers there are consistently rising. So we relied in part on that.
Another stakeholder group that somebody had a question about was Farm Bureau. Can you guys speak to whether or not Farm Bureau was involved in your processes? We'll start with Erica because you didn't answer the last question.
Yeah, well, my last response was pretty much ditto there. So same thing that they pretty much said. So yeah, we have had Farm Bureau engaged, absolutely. We've had in the planning process, and now they're also a few of their staff are members of our network.
In Ohio, we also had a produce grower in our county who I believe at the time she was the president of the county Farm Bureau, and she was very active, hugely important, on the full committee and on some of the task forces. And what we're finding in Ohio, and I very often tell people, sometimes people say, oh, the Farm Bureau, they're just the big farmers. Well, no, not really. What I'm finding in Ohio is the Farm Bureau is nothing if not pragmatic, and they see that a growing number of their members are looking at niche markets or focusing largely on local food, and from a policy standpoint, I've seen them getting much more interested. So we had a committee member from the local Farm Bureau, but I also frequently was in touch with people at the State Farm Bureau.
And this is Allison, very similar response to Erica and Brian.
I think that we probably have time for one more question, and even though I note that the person who asked it has left, so we will post it, I'm personally curious about the answer myself, and it may be pointed first towards Erica, but if all of you want to answer, you're welcome to, which is, have you had success making land trust land available for farming?
Well, in Vermont, we have a fabulous Vermont Land Trust who has a farmland access program. And not only that, the Vermont Land Trust works very closely with about 5 other groups as part of a farmland access network. They have a matchmaking website and program to match farmers on land and leasing and all sorts of other things. But absolutely, they've been I think they've been very successful. And it's one of those programs that is just doing so well. So we just really want to support what's happening with conserving. Of course, I think we still have a long way to go. I just think it's a great, they're doing a good job. So, yeah.
And either Brian or Allison, have you had any successes in your regions with land trusts making land available for farming?
Yes, the grant that we made to PASA, Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Ag, was supporting like a pilot project on a land trust, and then also doing a lot of, PASA specifically was doing a lot of physical matchmaking between landowners, including land trusts, and interested farmers, especially farmers who have gone through like apprentice programs or have been managers, like farm managers. So, and then there's more of that happening. The land trust community in southeastern PA and southern New Jersey talks about it a lot, and they want to see it happen more and more.
And I assume you're talking in talking about land trust property. You're referring to like donated easements and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Okay. And there's a fair amount of that in Ohio, a little bit less so in central Ohio, our immediate area. However, some of the people who are very involved in one of our the next county out from the urban core still has a lot of very good farmland, and the local land trust there is actually one of the driving forces in creating a county food council there. So I think we're going to be seeing more of that.
Great, thank you. I just got a note from Erica Goodman here that we are getting the yellow light warning that we've run over time. So we're going to wrap up now. We will make sure that on the website there's contact information for the presenters as well as the presentations and answers to the questions. I hope that folks will be interested enough to join us again on December 13th. And thank you very, very much for your attendance today. And thank you especially to the presenters. It was great.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Julia.